Michelle, so good to see you.
It's a pleasure.
How are
a long
you?
time. We go way back.
We do go way back. I remember it was like early Beehive startups days.
Yeah.
When we first connected, and you're doing all this incredible stuff and you're still doing it.
It's fun.
Beautiful.
I think we've all had evolutions in our careers. And, we met back when I was doing Startup Princess, and now we're both doing different things, but I love it.
Now, Startup Princess was like, tell us what that was, because it was phenomenal. And I remember we wrote about it. I think that's how we met.
Startup Princess, it was an organization for women entrepreneurs back when there really wasn't anything.
Right.
And we were a massive blog. We're featured in Forbes as one of the top 10 resources for women entrepreneurs. Really big on Twitter back in the big Twitter days. We still Twitter a little, X, whatever they call it. And we just were there in a space where there wasn't any. And then lots of others popped up, and we kind of evolved a little bit to support with what people really wanted and needed without competition. And then we also, Kelly and I kind of went different ways with different business ventures, but there's so many pieces of what I do now that are partially because of the success of Startup Princess.
Yeah. Tell people what you're doing now, because I think it's important.
So I do leadership development for companies and organizations and individuals. And so we work with mostly organizations all across the country to help them tell better stories with their employees and to improve their emotional intelligence. Because I spend a lot of time with organizations on product. And what we have found, especially with the research that we've done, is that it's not about productivity in the way that we think it is. It's really about what's happening in employees' minds that is affecting the way that they work. And so we work with organizations to teach and train on emotional intelligence.
Okay, let's go deeper on emotional intelligence. That's really interesting. And do you think we have a bit of a crisis in emotional intelligence right now? Pulling out of, I only say that because it seems like we have a mental health crisis, particularly pulling out of COVID-19.
Agreed.
And I wonder if those two things are connected.
So I was really careful in my research. I didn't really want to focus specifically on COVID-19, but I feel like there has been a ginormous shift in the way people are reacting and the resilience levels of individuals. I think that we lost our resilience reserves through COVID-19 and through the years that followed, which means that as new challenges come, we are not as equipped to be able to bounce back as quickly as we want to. So in organizations, that looks like low employee engagement, the era of quiet quitting that we've all talked about, people not being able to retain employees. And the onset of also remote work plays really heavily into the productivity of employees, but really it's about their emotional intelligence. If they're emotionally intelligent enough to be productive at home, then they can be productive at home. But the reality is if they're dealing with those resilience reserves and that are depleted, they probably aren't as productive at home as they would be in an office. So it all stems back to whether or not people are mentally and emotionally well enough to be able to look at their challenges and be able to say, what do I do anyway? How do I bounce back? How can I be stronger?
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you improve your emotional intelligence?
So I think there are a number of different ways, and everyone has their own little pieces. But my number one is start to think and act positively, which sounds very cliche and very simple, but even the research showed that positivity is the number one thing that helps people improve their emotional intelligence. If we can get to a place where we can look at a situation and even if it's a struggle, to be able to say, this is a problem and I know I'm going to find a solution, that is so much better than this is really hard. I have lots of challenges. And everyone I know does right now. Everyone I know has big challenges. So do you have the mental wellness to be able to say, yes, I can get through that? But I also think we have to be intentional about infusing joy into our lives. We do so many things like surviving rather than saying, what could I do today that would make me happier? Whether that's hobbies or outings or spending time with family and friends. The research all shows that we should all be spending more time doing things that bring us joy rather than expecting the world to provide it for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like we do have this, it does seem like we expect so much from everyone around us and like the world and society itself. And, like we have like AI now.
Yeah.
And a year ago we didn't or whatever. And now like if you went a day without like ChatGPT, like, oh, it's good. If it like went down or something.
Yeah.
It's like that thing didn't even exist. Like recently, like yesterday it didn't exist.
Correct.
And like now we're like dependent on it. It's really interesting.
I think that the onset of AI makes emotional intelligence that much more important. Like in an era where we're trying to decide what's fact, what's fiction, what can we rely on, how are we interacting with the people around us, whether that's a text message or an email. I think in the age of AI, EI needs to be center stage because we have to be mentally able to discern truth and also to be able to respond positively if something happens in the world or in the news or in our neighborhoods that we don't like. So it's tricky.
So is leadership high emotional intelligence?
Yes. And what was fascinating about the research is that working Americans who are employees, whether they're mid-level or lower, will say that their happiness and resilience is dependent upon their leadership happiness and resilience. Like 70% of working Americans said that if their leaders were happier and more resilient, they would be happier and more resilient. And that would make them more productive and better team players. And so in the office, we see this interesting dynamic where we have a whole bunch of humans, whether you are awesome or not awesome or feeling awesome that day, but we've got them leading each other. And really the corporate culture really stems around the common language that we're using around if it's okay to not be okay sometimes, or if we are talking about mental health benefits and really encouraging our team to use the ones that we have, right. Or if we're just pretending like everything's okay, in which case we still have those fake conversations, and fake emotions lead to fake relationships. And so we've got a lot of underlying challenges to culture, but also that leads to the productivity engagement that every leader and every CEO wants.
When you go into companies and you coach them and their leaders, what are some of the, just broadly, obviously, because you don't want to talk about specific clients, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing across the board that companies are facing and leaders are facing?
Sure. I think at the top of the list, the first is low employee engagement, people who are not participating or actively being as productive as they should be with their job. Mm-hmm. I think with that comes a lot of employee turnover and dealing with employee retention as a big issue. Mm-hmm. Lack of communication, lack of employees understanding the company culture, poor teamwork. But one of the biggest problems that I think stems that we kind of talk about all of these buzzwords in leadership development, but at the end of the day, we have a workforce that isn't capable of solving problems. And they might be able to get a report done or do something else. But if there's a challenge, then being able to solve problems, whether it's personally or professionally, weaves into all of these other issues, being productive, being better team players, communicating better at every level of the organization, supporting each other, the ability to be able to mentor. That all stems onto whether or not people are able to have the emotional intelligence to solve problems. And so you've got CEOs that are scratching their heads and managers that think they're doing a great job, but it's way more than profit and loss statements and the conversations that are happening around the boardroom.
Yeah. How much of that is work from home, hybrid, all that type of stuff?
It's interesting to me because I have seen both. There are organizations that I feel like are absolutely rocking remote work or hybrid work in some ways. And there are others that are really struggling with it. And I think the core is what's set at the culture and what expectations are set to how people work and how people operate. And at the end of the day, if you have 10 employees and they're all doing different things, how do you require those 10 employees to perform the way that you need them to perform, whether they're in the office or out of the office? And part of that I do think is leadership capability. And are leaders developed enough to be able to have tough conversations with people who seem like they've been gone all afternoon, or to be able to put KPIs in place that will encourage better conversations? But what the research showed that was fascinating was that while employees say remote work is something that they want that would make them happier, the employees that worked in an office full-time or hybrid were happier than those who didn't. And so as one of the sub demographics that we checked out, the people who are having better conversations and better connection are actually happier at their jobs than those who are working in silos and individually. And like I said, there are anomalies that I see. I know one organization I work with that remote work is absolutely their best thing and it's working. Their employees are performing, but so many others are trying to decide, do we bring people back in? And more organizations are at least moving hybrid, if for no other reason, for corporate culture.
Well, and yeah, you kind of need to, it kind of depends on what you're doing as a company.
Yes, I agree.
That for sure kind of plays a role in it. But when COVID hit and we were all working from home and we were all like, we learned about joggers and like these new, like kind of nice, like, by the way, I'm still wearing them. Yeah. That part hasn't changed. I'm literally wearing them right now.
And
it was like really fun. And like, you could just I remember like going, I'm working from home right now. Like this is
It's
really
best.
cool. You know what I mean? I can do whatever. And then probably a month into that, I'm like, I hate this.
Yep.
I hate this. Like I don't see anyone. I don't talk. All my conversations are via Zoom. Like what is going on? This sucks. And I imagine that's how most people began to feel at some point in that, where they're like, hey, wait, we need connection. We're human beings, right? Like we
Mhm.
need that connection. And a Zoom is not connection, right? It's more of like a performance. In fact, I've stopped. Tell me what you think about this. I've kind of stopped doing only Zoom calls. I'm like, I'm just going to call you.
Mhm.
Like, what if I just called you on your
What
phone?
if we just had a conversation? What if I didn't schedule it and just called you? Would you pick up?
What if I just called you on the phone
I love it.
instead of like, because we got to set up and we got to like make sure our background is all perfect and like, oh, is the lighting right? Like that's so weird
Mhm.
to just like have a normal conversation. You know?
Agreed.
It's interesting.
I think we as humans, and there's a big debate, especially in the research that I'm in, well, introverts will actually work better at home than they'll work in the office. And introverts wanted to stay home even after that month where everyone else wanted to go back. But the reality is that what we tracked was that all team metrics tanked. Whether you're an introverted extrovert, whether you love people or don't love people, whether you like physical contact or don't like physical contact, it all comes back to team connection. And they found that people weren't communicating as well. They're much more, they're less patient. So they're more likely to snap at a team member who doesn't perform or misses a deadline, because there isn't that, like if you and I are in the same office, I'm going to say, hey, how are your kids doing? But if we're on a Zoom, we're going to get the job done and move on, which is great. There's a benefit to that too, because then meetings don't
Sure.
last long. But when we connect as humans and as friends even, or even just as colleagues, then we're connecting on a more real level that allows people the space to be human, but also gives people the understanding, oh yeah, so-and-so has a child who is sick, and so-and-so is caring for their aging parent, and so-and-so just got a divorce. Like, and we're just way more mindful of people and give them the space and grace while also being able to say, I know you have this challenge and we'd love for you to perform, or how can we support you? And so it gives you the better capability, not just to be connected, but to know how to support people in their challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that really interesting. And I do think like this Zoom culture, we've got like, we thought like, oh, this is better than meetings. We can get a lot done. But then you just stack up a bunch of Zooms and none of these need to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed this?
I agree.
Like, we're doing too many meetings. We're doing too many Zoom meetings. Like, let's just go for coffee and like talk about our lives. Like, I can literally email. I've been tracking this for the past 6 months. I'm like, almost every call or meeting I'm in could have literally been a short email, not a long email. Like a pretty, like, here's what we're going to do. Here's what you should do. Like, let us know how you feel about it.
Well, and I think that's part of the conversation around emotional intelligence. Like, do you want your employees to be connected to you, and do you want them to actually be working, or do you want them in a meeting, right? And if they're in meetings all day long, like Zoom fatigue is a thing. Also, the disconnection that comes from that is also taxing on the brain. And so more and more, it's like, wait, are we really building connections and accomplishing the tasks that need to be done? Or are we having a Zoom meeting every Thursday because we always have?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really great time. As there are shifts in the economies, shifts in landscape, we need to shift also in the ways that we engage, because I think that we're reaching those places where people are tapped and communication needs to happen on multiple levels and not just one or two.
Yeah. It seems like those connections should probably be more deeper and more human connections than like, hey, can you do this? Because again, like we all know what we're doing.
Yes.
That's another like kind of interesting piece at this point. Like there's no secrets. There's no like, oh, let's talk it out. And there's like, we got to whisper or something, like we're all kind of doing like 5 things.
Right. And not only do we need to have those conversations about work, but one of the things that the research showed was that people want to have more conversations about their hobbies and interests, and they want their bosses to care. They want their bosses to care if they're marathon training. They want their bosses to care if they went to a quilt show. And it doesn't mean you have to be like the social planner, but if you have an employee and you say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And they say, oh, I'm just doing marathon training. On Monday, it doesn't hurt or take very much time to say, how was marathon training? Did it work? Did you have a great week? Was it tricky or hard? Because that's what builds the connection. That's what helps us say, you're not just somebody who's a button pusher or report producer. You are someone that is a human that we care about, and they're more likely to perform when they feel cared about or interested in. And so it's way more than just getting stuff done, but how are we connecting to build those relationships?
And don't you think the button pusher jobs are going away anyway?
I agree.
And so like this becomes more and more important. in this. Like, I really think the differentiator in business moving forward is going to be exactly what you're talking about: emotional intelligence, human intelligence, human connection, curated connections, like things like that. I really think all of those are becoming big because there's no longer. I used to have a job when I was like 20, or I can't remember how old I was. And I would just like take one PDF from this folder and put it in a different folder. And I think I did one other thing, but it was like crazy. Like, that was my job.
Wow.
And I did it for like 3 months or something. Like, I can't remember. I can't even remember why I did it. But that was that's gone. You don't do that anymore.
Mm-mm.
There's no more like mindless jobs.
Nope.
AI is ending that.
And they are doing all the reports for us.
Yeah.
So the people that you have that are simply synthesizing reports or creating reports, we don't need to do that. So now we need the problem solvers. We need the thinkers. We need the ones who are willing to come to the table and say, hey, here's a challenge that AI can't solve. What are the humans doing about it?
You know what I find interesting about all this, as someone who ran Silicon Substance, is running Silicon Substance and has for the past 10 years, we were like, for the past 8, I would say, or the past 2, maybe a little bit different, but the first 8, we were like, computer science degrees are where you should get, STEM education or where you should get. Now I'm kind of like, humanities degrees are probably going to be pretty good. Like, you should go major in philosophy or,
communication.
English or,
That's when they ask me, what would you have done differently when you're on a panel or you're speaking somewhere and they're doing the Q&A? What would you have done differently as a kid? And I say, I would have taken way more communication and English classes because at the end of the day, my ability to communicate is what is going to separate me from a AI platform or from something that has less meaning. And so I agree. I think the technology is great and we should all know what it is. And all those statistics about the jobs that people are getting, they weren't thought about 10 years ago that our kids are going to get 10 years from now. I agree, all of that. But our ability to communicate and express ourselves is going to separate us and help us be better communicators.
It's such a huge differentiator that people do not appreciate until you get into your career, how important it is and how valuable and how big of like a leg up it is to be able to communicate, like write an email or, hold a conversation, those types of things. Like, it's surprise. You think like, everybody can do that. No, they can't.
No.
Actually, it's wild.
And
we're all like sending, but remember like when people would send emails prior to like Grammarly or like spell check and you're like, oh, it's good. Now we're all like, because we've all got Grammarly, like they're all like pretty well spell checked at least. But there's a difference. You can tell, like, and it's just so obvious that authenticity is really what we're talking about.
Yeah, I did a round of interviews. It was about a year ago. And I had somebody who I liked her resume. I wanted to meet with her. And she was like, I think you should be able to hire me off of, like, in an email. I was like, hey, can we set up a time to meet? She's like, I think you should be able to hire me off of my experience. And I only hire people I can communicate with. So if you're not willing to communicate with me, then I can't take you to that next level. And I remember being so incredibly baffled that she thought that I would just choose her off of a piece of paper in a job that does require so much communication and working with me and conversations. But it's interesting how people work and function, and whether or not that is because she was really confident in her abilities, which is great, or she was insecure about her abilities, which is an entirely separate issue. She eventually came in and met with me and wasn't the right fit for a number of reasons, but I couldn't tell that on a piece of paper. Yeah. There are things that happen in conversation that are way better able for me to discern connectivity, connection, conversations, compatibility.
Yeah. And why would you want to work with someone or work for someone you haven't met?
Weird.
Just the reverse is true.
It was a very
that's
weird
really odd interaction. Yeah, that's odd. We mentioned Zoom fatigue. I wonder if you're seeing anything with leadership fatigue. Are people kind of getting a little bit like, this is crazy?
I think they're tired. I think they're dealing with a tired workforce. I think they're tired themselves. I also think we are dealing with the challenges of people who were never meant to be leaders, who are really great at their jobs, and somebody assumed that they would be great at leading people, but that's not necessarily the case. But I do think when you have a workforce that is so taxing, then you find that your leaders are taxed as well. And one of the questions that we asked was, what would help you feel better and feel more emotionally resilient to be able to manage your team? And they said things like mentoring and reading books and listening to podcasts. And so they're craving the education, because this isn't what's taught in schools. People aren't learning and going to resilience classes and emotional intelligence classes, right. But they get to those places and then they're like, now what? The world is not teaching what we need the most. And so that's why, I mean, I'm grateful because I have a job, but it also means that as you look at these taxed leaders that are trying to figure out how to motivate a team, well, they can't do that if they're taxed themselves. And so finding ways to build their own emotional resilience reserves will help them to be able to do that with their team and have better conversations all across the board.
Well, you think about what leaders have experienced just in the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we mentioned COVID. That was crazy. And then everything that was happening during COVID, social unrest, elections, all this type of stuff. It's just like, and
So much.
people care about elections more than they should, or that care about them not enough, whatever, who cares? All of that stuff was like part of like society, right? Which was, and an interesting thing started happening. Because trust in institutions and political leaders and things like that were going down in media, the public was looking at business leaders
Mm-hmm.
to speak out on issues that had nothing to do with their companies,
Correct.
which was really interesting. So all of a sudden, like you could be a great leader actually of like a software company because you know everything about it and you can lead those people and all that type of stuff. But then everybody's like, hey, what do you think about this? Let's just use war in Ukraine. And everyone's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you asking me that? I'm running like a software as a service business. We have 30 employees. How is the world asking me this thing? Are you noticing that? Like, and how are leaders dealing with this idea that they're now being asked to lead or at least speak out on issues that have nothing to do with their company?
I think this is an interesting side effect, if you will, from having asking deeper questions about our leaders. Like, do you trust your leaders nationally? Yes or no? Do you trust the media? Yes or no? And so in an absence of trust, we look for other places we can anchor, which is totally normal. Like when we're dealing with unrest in our own lives, personally, if there's something big going on or even something small, we'll find another way to anchor. Sometimes that defense mechanism is positive. Sometimes that defense mechanism is negative, but we always find some way to anchor. And so if you are looking around and you don't know where to turn for information, then you ask yourself the question, who else do I trust? So if they're asking you that question, then that means that they trust you and they don't trust the media and they don't trust the national leadership. And so, which is interesting because now we're also seeing that happen in the government as well. We're hiring business leaders to run countries because we're trying to find new people we can trust.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's good or bad, I'm not here to say, but it's interesting because as the world looks around, they want two things, trust and truth. And while both are very tricky to figure out and understand, they will continue to find it until they feel like they've landed in that place that makes them feel anchored, whether that's good or bad or yes or no. But you'll find that now people are hopping around. Can I trust my leaders? Can I trust my neighbors? Can I trust the people down the street? Can I trust my mayor? Like so many questions, all because of what we experience in the world that makes us say, I don't feel safe.
Yeah, I don't trust anything. You know, like we're in this really interesting part of society or American history and probably world history as well around the globe where we just don't trust anyone anymore, like at all. Like, yeah, like I could hear anything and I'd be like, I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Like tell me what you're, like, and it used to be the exact, like the New York Times reported this, like even like 10 years ago, that was like a big thing. It's like, oh, okay, that's true. And now I'm like, I don't know if I trust literally anyone. Like it's crazy, which makes, how do you live in a society that doesn't have trust?
I think that we're watching it dismantle in so many ways and places. But people want to trust. Like we are trusting. We're also meaning making machines. We want to find places. And like I said, everyone's looking for a way to feel safe. And all of this stems back to the emotional intelligence piece of being able to say, if I can't trust them, who can I trust? And we also are finding people they're not sure that they trust themselves. And so if you don't trust yourself to make a good decision, maybe you've made lots of bad decisions, maybe you've had lots of businesses fail and you don't trust yourself to make choices, then you want someone else to make choices for you. And so it all comes back to, are you healthy and well and able to be able to discern truth? Are you able to be able to sift through what's being put in front of you and also be able to ask the questions? I think we used to live in a generation. I grew up in a generation where we allowed other people to think for us. And we are in the generation where you have to think for yourself and you have to be able to sift through what's there and connect into what feels right for you, even if it's not right? Like, what is right for you? Because we've got influencers telling us online what we should do. We've got a president telling us what we should do. We've got leaders telling us what we should do at the office. We've got our neighbors telling us what we should be socially engaged in. And at the end of the day, if we don't trust ourselves, then how can we even look around and trust anyone else? But it's so much easier to trust other people than yourself.
Yeah. And there's this like, the problem is like, hey, we want you to do this, whether it's the president or neighbors or community and all that type of stuff. And then so often you're like, why? And that kind of like stumps the whole thing. It's like, why are we doing that? It's like, oh, okay. Now I want to know
Right.
why you're even asking me to do that,
Correct.
you know, which is really interesting. Yeah, man, the lack of trust. How do leaders build trust, do you think? And how do you coach them to do that?
I think in an organization, it starts for me with common language. I think if you want to have a culture, whether it has to extend beyond the cereal in the break room and whether or not they get other company perks. So I love
People get cereal in the break room?
No, I keep the cereal in the break room, but that can't be the only thing, right? So, but
we're like little kids.
I know, aren't we?
We all just want to go back to being little kids. It's so sweet.
And have things provided for us. I was having a conversation with a friend who took a pay cut at an organization that was growing. And he was recently laid off from an organization. And he said, they feed us like 5 times a week. It's so awesome. And he said, but honestly, what I love the most about what I do is I am happy at work every day and I trust the leadership. Which it was funny that he shared all of these pieces that you would think he would hear, but he loved where the company was going. He felt like he could believe them. And so it was multiple pieces that made the corporate culture great. And we talk about money all the time, but people are willing to take a pay cut at a place that they feel good. Do they trust you as an organization? Is there a common language about what you're working towards? The other thing that the research showed us is people want advancement opportunities. They want to know that they can stay at organizations for a long time. And so are there ways that you're championing them? I can't say the word championing them.
It's a hard word to say.
It's a hard word. English is hard and it's my first language and I still struggle. So how are they cheering them on and growing in the organization and providing mentorship opportunities and training leaders to be able to grow? But that trust all comes from making sure that the leaders are being honest, which if you're caught in something, you need to apologize and just agree that you shouldn't have said that. We all make mistakes. There is space for us to be human. There's not space for continual lies. And so trust in an organization is all about it. And I don't even think people talk about transparency being number one. What we have found is employees don't have to know everything that's going on or why, but they have to know why they do their job. And they can look past lots of other things if they have meaning and purpose in what their individual responsibilities are. So spending time to make sure people are aligned with their job descriptions, that they know what they're doing, that they feel like they're contributing, that they're allowed to contribute, all of that leads to the trust and the culture that makes people feel like they want to belong and be there. But it's not just the lateral conversations. It's the ones that are happening above and below them that also matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. How does social media play in all of this? We've talked about Zoom and work from home and all that type of stuff. Like, we all know social media is bad for us. We all consume it in an insane amount anyways. Like, will we look back at it as like our generation's cigarettes or what?
I think there's absolutely some addictive things that happen there, especially for me as my background is in marketing and advertising. I worked for lots of advertising agencies. I still own one. And while I do leadership development now, what I love about it is it's still telling stories, right? Choosing the audience that you're telling the stories to. But because of my background in marketing, I do spend a lot of time on social media. I spend a lot of time building out content for social media and a lot of time there. And so we actually asked about it in the research study, how people are connected. And as you can imagine, the people say the more time they spend on social media, the less fulfilled they feel or the less happy they feel. But what's interesting is we asked a question about what they felt like the intent of social media was. And over 70% of working Americans said that they felt like social media was intended to provide them negative feeling and emotion, which was so fascinating that people know that social media is intended to cause you negative emotions, and yet we still use it like a drug. And so for me, in every organization that I work with, I am always with individuals, because it's not an organizational issue as much as it is an individual issue. do you know how it works for you? Because for some people, 100% sobriety is the only way they can function. And for other people, it's like, I give myself 30 minutes a day and that works.
Yeah.
But more than anything, I think that as we figure out how to interact and as we figure out what we need, contributing is more important than consuming. So if you want to figure out how to have more positive interactions on social media, contribute to conversations and have conversations rather than just getting caught stuck in the scroll of things.
Yeah, I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I honestly think like we'd probably be better off if we were really good at social media here, and we're not because of me. Like I hate it.
It's tricky.
Yeah, I hate like, oh, we got to splice up this. Like, yeah, like, I don't even care. Don't even come to our events. Like, like I get to like that point where I'm like, who cares?
Right.
It's interesting.
Well, and it changes so much that is one of the places we feel taxed as leaders, because if we could set it and forget it, and I'm not talking about like automation and taking away the humanity of it, but if we could set a strategy that we didn't feel like we had to redo every 3 months or 6 months based off of algorithms, we probably would feel healthier about it, creating content in our own organizations. But because it changes so much, it's one of those places like we don't trust it anymore, right?
Yeah.
That's another place where we have lost trust. Things that used to work before don't work anymore. And especially for people like me and you that have been around for a couple of decades of this, and to a certain extent, some companies have tech debt. I feel like I have marketing debt. Like I'm doing some of the things that I did 10 or 15 years ago that certainly aren't working today, but they worked then and I still want them to work. And, but I'm willing to try new things, but then I'm constantly trying new things because I've seen all of the different ones come. And that's what makes it hard. And that's what that hurts our own emotional intelligence, is this belief that we're going to be able to figure it out. I don't know if we will.
You know, what's interesting too is, what do you think about this whole concept of like owning your audience? And our number one marketing tool at Silicon Slopes has been from day one to today is just our newsletter list. And just like a simple email like that gets by far the most results out of anything else that we do. It's not even close. Do you advise people like, hey, try to just own your audience, whether that's a newsletter list or something similar?
Yes. What we talk about is, and I will say it till the cows come home, your most important marketing job is maintaining your home court advantage. And your home court advantage is what you own. It's your list, it's your website, it's your retail location if you have one, but everywhere else you're playing as a visitor. So if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or TikTok or wherever you are, anytime they could shut down, or I have so many clients who have lost their followings over the years, and then they panic and they cry. And I'm like, but you invested all of this time on borrowed space. And if you had spent all that time in using that borrowed space to build your email list, we would be having different conversations. Yeah. And so I absolutely feel like that's the case for us individually as well. How are we building our own home court advantage? We're spending so much time allowing other places, other social media, other people, the news determine who we are and what we're going to be, instead of saying, wait, what do I care about? What do I want? What makes me happy? What builds my strength? What helps me feel like I'm in control? And so it works for marketing and it works for humans too, to be able to say, we cannot live on borrowed space. We have to be owning our own.
Yeah, you got to own your own. It's crazy. Well, and sometimes like Google will even change up the algorithms there so that, you start bouncing a lot for a second. It's
SEO
really weird,
is just as big of a
weird
jump.
It's weird. What else did you learn in this study that stands out that you think we should know about?
I think we touched on a couple things, but one of the questions that we asked that sticks out to me the most is we asked individuals if they were happier and more resilient, what would they be able to do in the office? And there were lots of different workplace situations that we tested. We tested productivity, team building, communication, ability to lead, feeling like they were included in something, creativity, innovation, all of those. And 90% of working Americans said that if they were happier and more resilient, they would be better in all of those areas. And so there wasn't even just a standout of place. And sure, there were some. Productivity was one of the number ones. Ability to work with teams was in the mid, but communication and connection and all of that we look at as ways for people to build that culture that you want and build the results that you want. But interestingly enough, they also said, like we talked about, that leaders make a big difference in that too. And if they don't feel like their leaders are leading the way in that, they have an excuse not to. So as you think about different areas of emotional intelligence and culture in organizations, I think that as we continue to have conversations about leading teams, leading leaders, leading individuals, that what we think is going to help, because I have people for 2 decades say, hey, come in and teach my people productivity training. And I would come in and teach productivity training and they're like, oh, that kind of worked for a little bit, but it didn't do it. And then when I figured this out, I went to some of those organizations and I was like, let me come back. I want to teach your people about happiness and emotional intelligence. And they laughed in my face and said, no, I can't afford that. I can't spend time on soft skills. I can't spend money there. But I was able to talk to in shortly after I made the shift about 5 or 6 years ago. And both of them said, our teams are more productive now with their ability to be able to understand how their emotions work and to be able to shift and change what they needed than they were when you came and did productivity training. And so 6, 12, 24, 36 months later, they're like, we're using the same language now. And they are still better able. They're using the online training portions, the videos that we talk about. And so as silly as it sounds, I am so passionate because I know it moves the needle. I'm so passionate because I know that emotional intelligence will help from the top to the bottom. That all of the things that the leadership team is scratching their head about can be solved by helping their employees feel more emotionally intelligent and more resilient. So I'm passionate about it. I love it. And I'm grateful that the research backs it up, because now it's not just me saying you need this. It's the research that says that it works. But I also feel like for each of us, it gives us an opportunity to reflect. I have a team that I connect with and that I lead. And sometimes I catch myself going back into old patterns because that's what I was taught in school, or that's what I was taught in a book about how leaders should be. And yet when I go back and say, oh, wait, that's not really what we're doing anymore. And so we have to give ourselves a lot of space and grace. Part of this resilience and building those reserves back for us individually and organizations is saying we're going to make mistakes, but we're also going to come back and say we're willing to stretch and try again.
Yeah, I love that. How do people find you? How do they work with you?
You can find me online at speakmichelle.com. You can get the research as well at speakmichelle.com/research. And there's lots of ways we can connect and have more conversations.
Michelle, thank you so much for coming in. Seriously. It's so good to see you.
Yeah,
Just to
so
see
good to
you
see
again.
you. Yeah.
It's awesome.
I love it. I love it every time we chat. It's great.
Thanks, my friend.